Who is to blame for the injury to Trey Lance? What is the process that led the 49ers to where they are at the quarterback position, specifically with the future of the position and Trey Lance? And is Talanoa Hufanga, the 49ers' second-year safety, a superstar? Croc and I will get into that on today's episode of Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you. Thanks for making Locked On 49ers your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their prize pick projections, you can win up to 10 times your money on that entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Okay, Croc, now that we've had some time to marinate on it and sleep on it after the 49ers 27-7 victory over the Seattle Seahawks, I think in the short term, looking at the 49ers, we have even a clearer image post Trey Lance injury of what this team's going to look like with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. They played a really nice game, I think, on both sides of the ball. We'll talk a little bit about the defense today as well. The number one defense in the NFL, right, Croc? And that was what was going to lead the team no matter who was at quarterback for the 49ers. So you feel okay going into week 3 and beyond in this season with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, knowing what I think this team is and what this 49ers team could look like. But we've got to rewind a little bit and try to figure out how the 49ers got here with Trey Lance. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of people throwing blame in different directions, whether or not you can blame head coach Kyle Shanahan for Trey Lance's injury. And when we recorded that Rapid React podcast last night after the game, Kyle Shanahan was at the press conference, and we hadn't heard those comments yet from him, and he was asked those questions. And so, Croc, I want to talk a little bit about that. And how do you feel now about what led us here with Trey Lance? We'll talk about what we expect for him in the future, but getting back to the question of Kyle Shanahan and how much blame I think he should carry in the Trey Lance injury. And if your opinion has maybe changed a little bit since that Rapid React podcast immediately following the game.
I think my opinion is definitely not going to change. Again, I'll kind of reiterate some of my issues with quote unquote trying to develop him. And I listened to this podcast, Rob Dyrdek. I know a lot of people remember him from the Robin Big Show. People, let me tell you about my best friend. That was one of my shows growing up I love watching. But anyways, he has this podcast about entrepreneurship, etc. And he talked about the 4 milestones when it comes to building a business or having a business and the different things that you have to go through. And it's crazy. I was listening to it this morning, so I still have this thought kind of fresh in my mind. But having a plan and having goals and along the way checking off different milestones. And I thought you had an opportunity to go through this with Trey Lance in the sense of his development early on, and you bypassed that. And it brought you to a situation where you have to try to win by all means. And that kind of also means running more with Trey Lance because other areas maybe you're not as confident, but there's too much on the line. So I think from that standpoint, I blame Kyle just for the way he went about it, just the overall situation, but not so much the injury to a T. I hope I'm kind of rambling, but I hope that makes sense. But I want to hear your thought. Here we go. Let's just hear your thought because I know I haven't heard your thoughts on this since yesterday. I know you have kind of changed and you're going a little bit harder in one direction.
Yesterday, basically, I said, yes, partially Kyle Shanahan is to blame, and he has to be. He's the, he's the top of the pyramid. He's the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. Everything that happens with the 49ers, it traces back to Kyle Shanahan at some point. And Trey Lance did get injured carrying the ball between the tackles, which is something that this is not a hindsight thing. This is something I had talked about just after last week's game. Trey Lance getting hit too much. Trey Lance's own colleague that plays for the Chicago Bears was saying that Trey Lance gets hit too much, right? So I don't think you can look at Trey Lance's injury and say, oh, this is just a fluke football thing that just kind of happens sometimes in football, because yes, football injuries do happen, but I think the 49ers and the way that Trey Lance was being used by Kyle Shanahan accelerated that process, made it more likely than it needed to be that Trey Lance was going to get hurt. And when I heard Kyle Shanahan's comments after the game about it, and I kind of turned on Kyle a little bit harder when I heard his comments, because he could have sort of taken the high road and given the PC answer and saying, yeah, we got to do a better job of protecting our players or whatever, or said, this is the exact reason that this was happening and all this. But he said something like, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said, like, do you guys watch football? It was like, you know what, Kyle? Like, that's their jobs. Those reporters watch a lot of football. Croc, you and I watch a lot of football. We might not grind as much tape and spend as many hours on it as Kyle Shanahan does. And I totally get that his job is very difficult and it's hard to call plays, and he's a really good offensive coach. And he pointed to Josh Allen running the ball and some other things. But my response to that is, Kyle, you are running your quarterback more than Josh Allen. You're running your quarterback more than even Lamar Jackson.
I heard that. I heard Lamar Jackson averages 11 carries per game, and Trey Lance was at 13.
Yes, yeah, and he was on pace for another dozen or so carries in this game. He was already hit 4 times in the first quarter and in 3 official carries. And so if you go by 12 carries per game, which is what Trey Lance was on pace to do, he carried the ball 16 times in his first start last year against the Arizona Cardinals. 12 carries per game he would absolutely blow away the record for carries for a quarterback in a season. The most carries ever for a quarterback in a season was Lamar Jackson, 176 carries. If Trey Lance carried the ball 12 times a game for 17 games, it would be over 200 carries. That is bell cow running back usage. That is treating your quarterback like a running back. So Kyle, no. Well, first of all, Kyle, yes, we do watch football, right? Reporters do watch football. And Kyle, no. Nobody else in the NFL, in the history of the league, runs the ball as much as Trey Lance was averaging running the football. So that has to be said. And maybe I'm taking Kyle's comments a little too strong, and maybe he doesn't even realize in the moment how often he's been running. Trey Lance is probably not running those numbers necessarily. But if you look at Josh Allen, and Josh Allen was, and clearly now we know Kyle Shanahan envisioned Josh Allen when he took Trey Lance. Like, that's the player that Kyle Shanahan hoped he was getting in Trey Lance, is Josh Allen, right? Because Josh Allen really torched the 49ers that season before the Niners went and drafted Trey Lance. Josh Allen last year had the most carries he's had in his career, 17-game season instead of a 16-game season. Josh Allen last year carried the ball 122 times total, which is about 7 carries per game. So Trey Lance was almost doubling that. So, yes, Josh Allen runs the ball. No, he doesn't run the ball as much as Trey Lance had. So that just had to be said. And so, Kyle, if you want to run the ball just like other quarterbacks who run the ball do, okay, do it less. And that's my biggest argument. It's like playing blackjack. If you keep hitting, if you hit, you might not bust out, right? You're trying to get 21. You're trying to win the game. You're trying to win the hand. You're trying to win some money. If you hit, you might not bust. But if you keep hitting, eventually you're going to bust. And that's what it is like running the football in the NFL. It is a 100% injury rate if you are a ball carrier and you continue to get hit, and you're just gambling at that point. And then obviously now that leads to other questions about, okay, well, why is he running the ball so much? What about the pick of Trey Lance in the first place, the process that landed Trey Lance, which I want to get to next. But for Kyle Shanahan to say that he was using Trey Lance in a normal way that other NFL teams use their quarterback, that is just patently false.
You said it perfectly. That was great. And, I've kind of changed my stance on just to the amount. Now, when we get to the next segment, you talk about why he's doing that. I have some questions with that as well, so I can't wait to talk about that.
Okay, why was he using him in that way? And I want to throw a little bit of Debo into this as well, because I think Debo's getting used too much. Because, again, $25 million running back, I don't like that. $25 million dynamic receiver who does a ton for your football team, I do like that. So, yes, more next about Kyle Shanahan, the play calling, how he's using his 49ers players. But we got to talk about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. It's really easy. You open it up, you say, I need a car, and you can see all the local hosts close to you and what cars are available. And there's tons of different kinds of cars available. It's like Airbnb for cars, basically. And it's much easier and much nicer. You get a nicer car, I feel like, than you do if you're using the same old rental car company, because they have their couple of models that they have. You could literally find any type of vehicle you want with Turo. If you need to make a long distance trip and you want something that's smooth and a mid-sized car that rides well, you can find that. If you need a big car, a minivan, or an SUV for a family road trip, you got a lot of stuff to carry, you can find that at Turo from any number of hosts. A classic or luxury car for a very special event, you want to show up with style, you can do that. Or an economy car, you're on a budget, you just need to get from point A to point B, you can find those cars at Turo as well. Even test drive the next car you're thinking you might want to buy for yourself. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the cars right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch those boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show daily right here on the network. Myself and former NFL scout and ESPN scribe Matt Williamson, plus Eric Crocker doing the Locked On NFL draft thing with Ryan Tracy every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay, Croc. So Kyle Shanahan's usage, I have a problem with. It's not hindsight. I've talked about it before, talked about it all off season, talked about it last year after he had 16 carries in his first start, talked about it after week 1 when he had 13 carries in that start. I don't like, you should never try to get your quarterback hit more than he needs to. And when you look at someone like Lamar Jackson, for example, Lamar Jackson's a ninja. He's magic. He wasn't getting hit at the rate that Trey Lance is getting hit on his carries either. He's so good at slipping tackles, getting out of bounds. He's more of a dynamic runner. He's so much faster. Russell Wilson back in the day, it was always, if you do his own read or whatever, it's getting outside. You're getting out toward the sideline. Such a high percentage of his runs are between the tackles for Trey Lance. So you're not even looking at the number of carries where Trey Lance is averaging more. He's actually on those carries having more dangerous carries between the tackles and getting hit by big players. And I don't know if Trey Lance is necessarily the dynamic runner and was really good at running the ball to protect himself at all either. He was taking hits. Justin Fields could see it, right? He's like, I got to talk to my boy Trey. He's getting hit too much. And less than a week later, Trey Lance is injured with a season-ending injury. So there is definitely a correlation there, whether Kyle Shanahan wants to admit it or not. And so the next question, Croc, right, has to be why? Why does Kyle feel the need to utilize Trey Lance in that way?
A lot of people are saying, well, he can't throw the ball or he can't pass, and Kyle doesn't have any faith in him throwing the football around. But I will say this. Early on, I could say, I could see the erraticness, right? Like just kind of a little bit all over the place. I feel like from the first preseason game to the first game against Arizona, and you kind of fast forward to Houston and kind of what we've seen since then. Has there been a miss here and there? Yes, but it has not been nowhere near as erratic outside of the fourth quarter of the Bears game where, it was kind of a tsunami. But outside of that, it has been nowhere near as erratic as it was early on. I think he's been far more accurate. And when I say accurate, I mean at least just more in the general area, right? Like he's still not a guy that's just hitting everybody in stride, peppering passes all over the place, right? Like not that, but just in the sense of not overthrowing slants by 10 yards, because that's what was going on early on. He's not that guy anymore. So to feel like you absolutely have to run him 12 times or even have plays that make it optional for him to run that many times in the game, I think that's the part that might be a little comical. Even if you feel like he's not 100% there in his development where, remember Kyle Shanahan was like, I want Lamar Jackson that throws like Drew Brees, right? And maybe he doesn't throw like Drew Brees just yet, but he is much better now than he was early on. And if you look at the numbers, I think those back that up. Again, outside of the fourth quarter of the Bears game, but you go back to Houston, completed 70% of his passes. Next time we saw him live in the game against the Green Bay Packers, albeit backups, preseason, etc., completed 4 out of 5 passes. Was he super accurate on them? No, but still more accurate than what he was early on. And then even you look at the Houston Texans preseason game. Not great, right? I mean, everybody panicked. Oh my gosh, it was so bad. He still completed 7 out of 11 passes. Was it great by any means? No. All right, so don't message me talking about, Croc, you are over. No. And then you fast forward to the Bears game, which before the fourth quarter, he completed like 8 out of 15 passes. It was not bad, and there still weren't the wild misses. And I think that's the part where I think he's drastically improved. So just as a passer, even if you want to say, well, he's not up to the standards, etc., he is much better now than he was early on. Still, of course, with room to grow, but I don't think it's to the extent of he can't throw and you have to run him X amount of times. And even then, you look at early in that game against the Seahawks. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but I felt like I liked what I saw. Again, I'm looking for anything that kind of leads to where he's at in his development. That's what I'm looking. I know everybody looks at overall numbers. I'm looking, where is he in his development? And you saw him first pass, drop back. Yes, it's right in front of him, but everybody says, oh, he needs to improve on his intermediate to short range. Like, those are the things he needs to improve on. He can throw the ball down the field. Well, first throw, boom, hits a guy. He was in rhythm, good throw. He had an opportunity for a catch and run. Like, that's good. That's what you want. It's easy, whatever, but he completed the pass. This slant, I loved it. And again, I didn't love the fact that it was short of the sticks. But again, I'm looking at where is Trey Lance in his development. And I see him throw a slant with a free runner right in his face. He stared down the free. I see the free runner here. I'm not going to flinch. I'm going to deliver an accurate, catchable ball for a running back who's smothered in coverage, but I'm going to put it in the only spot. So when you start talking about where he's at in his progression, I mean, I see it improving to the point where I don't think he is someone you have to run as much as he has, to where people are like, oh, well, he's just trying to get by, right? Like, I started thinking about that. I'm like, I think people are kind of over exaggerating it or lumping in how he started and how he was missing early on to where he's at kind of now.
It's a great point, and I agree with you. Kyle Shanahan, the way he was using Trey Lance, would tell you that he doesn't have confidence that he's going to be able to be that guy from the pocket. But from what I saw and from what you saw, and we're not really there every day in practice, and we don't know exactly what the play calls are and how slow or what reads he's missing or whatever. But clearly, Kyle Shanahan told us that he doesn't have full confidence. But I question even what that gap was between, if just like take out, let's say Trey Lance he can't run at all, right? He's the same athlete as Jimmy Garoppolo. Whatever you do with Jimmy G is what you would do with Lance. How much worse, or is he worse at all? Just from a pure pocket, what he could do for the football team as a passer versus what Jimmy G can do. And I don't think there was that big of a gap just with that alone.
At least not in the trade-off of the efficiency might go down some.
Right.
But, the difference between converting on some of those big plays.
Exactly.
And everything having to be a little bit shorter, I'd say that's where it kind of evens out a little bit. Again, you're going to lose some efficiency, but gain more in explosive plays. And I think a lot of people expected that with him. And then you add the legs. So then that's what we're talking about when J.T. O'Sullivan says Super Bowl, like you have a better chance with Trey Lance, is because those things all coming together. And still work to do. But I felt bad for the kid thinking about it earlier today. And I'm just like, man, another year of lost development where I could see the small progress, each time he kind of stepped on the field. And you kind of, look at how would that be come week 18? And where would he be at? If he's making these small gains each week, I think you see closer to a guy who's making all the throws and still being able to use his legs to where now maybe Kyle doesn't have to lean on him at all as a runner.
Right. Exactly. And I think too, like you mentioned that play where he got hit. There was a runner in his face. You're going to get hit. He might have gotten hurt on plays where he's not carrying the ball. So it can't be 100% on Kyle just because football injuries do happen, but you just are enhancing those opportunities. Look at the Sunday night football game. Aaron Rodgers, darn near 40 years old. He had a zone read in the fourth quarter. It was a third and 4 play. He had his own read. What happened? The read was for the runner to go inside. Defensive end crashes, classic zone read. Like everyone's seen it a million times. We've seen it in the cap era. Every 49ers fan know what it looks like. Aaron Rodgers sees the defensive end crash. So what does he do? He pulls it wide open, runs for a first down, flops on the ground. Doesn't get touched. First down. It's a third down play late in the game to seal it, right? You can use those plays. You can use rushes to your advantage that in the right situation can help your football team versus what the risk reward is of a guy potentially getting hurt on a 2nd down and 8 in the first quarter. So that all needed to be said. I have another question about both Trey Lance and Deebo Samuel rushing usage. If you need your quarterback and your wide receiver to be the leading rushers for your football team, what does that say about your run game? And if nothing else, if you go talk to a random person on the street and say, hey, have you ever heard of Kyle Shanahan? And they'd say, yeah. What's the first thing that comes to mind? The run game.
Run game.
You can't have a successful running game without not only a running back leading your team in rushing by a lot, the quarterback and the wide receiver are your leading rushers ahead of any running back on your roster. That to me is a problem, knowing the Shanahan scheme, the Shanahan offense, and that now you're sitting here in 2022, 6 years into this regime, and it's still so much led by the defense, and you can't figure out how to run the ball without a quarterback and a wide receiver. That might be a bigger problem just with the entire offense, right? And the entire Kyle Shanahan era for me, because the one thing that we should be talking about right now is how, at least you got Kyle Shanahan. You're going to be able to run the football with your running backs.
Right. But I don't think he trusts Jeff Wilson. I don't want to say he doesn't trust Jeff Wilson. He had like 18 carries.
Yeah, and he looked good. He was fine. 4.7 yards per carry, was it? That's what you want. You want over 4 yards per carry. You can go win a football game if your defense is good and your quarterback's somewhat efficient.
It's just tough because you would like to be able to use the ability of having a quarterback that can pick you up 4 or 5 cheap yards, right? Whether it's zone read or whether it's a scramble on a passing play, just having the threat of that. And if the defense dictates your quarterback keeps it, I think you just have to hope that your quarterback can potentially, keep himself a little safer. And even then, you talked about Lamar Jackson and how dynamic he is, but I think the most underrated parts of Lamar Jackson, he makes guys miss, he does all that, but when it's time to get down, he gets down. And I think even when he doesn't 100% get down and he has to take some type of contact, he does a really good job of never getting hit square on. Never in a position where he's wrapped up and he's trying to drive for more yards and guys are just teeing off on him. You just don't see that. So I don't know how he does it. And we've seen some of the other guys be able to do that, but and I don't even think that's his game. And when I say his, I mean Trey Lance. Again, he is more Deshaun Watson. And you could say maybe a more unpolished version, but just in the sense of his athleticism and really how you want to utilize him. You don't see Deshaun Watson carry the ball a ton. You don't see – the most he's ever carried it in a year was like 99 times. And that's in the 16-game season. And that's the most. All right. So – you don't see a whole lot of zone read option with him. That's not the basis of the game with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. He's a drop back passer that can utilize his legs here and there, but not to the extent of that's a focal point of your running game. So, yeah, it's tough, and it got the kid hurt, and here we are.
Yep, here we are. Major questions about the development now of Trey Lance, what we'll see from there, and plenty to talk about as far as Trey Lance's future goes in the NFL and with the 49ers. One more point about the Trey Lance stuff. Croc can pinpoint to you let's say things don't go well and the Trey Lance era ends unsuccessfully, whenever it does end sometime into the future. I can pinpoint the day where the 49ers did go wrong in this whole process. We'll get to that next and answer the question, is 49ers safety Talanoa Hufanga a straight-up NFL superstar? Next. PrizePicks. Pick 2 to 5 players. If they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. It's super easy. I can call it up on my phone right now on the PrizePicks app, and I take a look at what the projections are for Monday Night Football games. We're recording this before Monday Night Football, looking at the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, that comparison that Kyle Shanahan liked to make. I wonder how many carries he's going to get tonight. I actually don't see a projection for carries, but there is a projection for passing yards, 262.5. Think he's going to go over or under? It's that easy. You make a choice. 275.5 passing yards for Kirk Cousins on Monday Night Football against Philly? Feels a little high, right? All you do, pick 2 to 5 players, any number of different stats. I was just looking at the passing yards, the first thing that popped up for me there. You can win up to 10 times your money on those entries. You're not competing with other people. It's just you versus those projections at PrizePicks. Not just NFL either. This is daily fantasy football, any sport, NBA, Major League Baseball, college sports, motorsports, contact sports, esports, even disc golf, cricket, tons of things that you can get involved with daily fantasy sports every single day at PrizePicks. Super easy. I can make my selections right there where I'm talking about it. Less than 60 seconds to make those entries, and withdrawals are always safe, fast, and easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up for daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100 to play with. Deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget, enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Okay, Croc. So the way Kyle Shanahan was treating Trey Lance, young player, needed a lot of work, and we knew there was going to be a development process with Trey Lance. But if he wasn't quite yet ready to play, and there was too much of a, man, we have to win now, but we're trying to develop a quarterback, and that wasn't really matching up for Kyle Shanahan at some point. And maybe if the development gets ruined and Trey Lance doesn't ever become a good NFL quarterback, where did that process go wrong for the 49ers? And I can tell you exactly where that process went wrong. It was March 26th when the 49ers, for no reason at all, traded up to number 3 when they didn't have to, and ended up spending 3 firsts and a 3rd round pick for a quarterback that they hadn't even finished the evaluations on yet. This was the COVID offseason. They hadn't met any of these players in person, whether it was Mac Jones, Justin Fields, or Trey Lance. That is an insane process, Croc. When you think, and I've talked about this before, this is not a surprise to our listeners, but when you take the names and the teams out of it, because, you have your affiliations, and I still think Trey Lance can be a really good quarterback. I like Trey Lance. Would I have traded up to number 3 for Trey Lance on March 26th? No. Would I have traded up for Mac Jones on March 26th? Heck no. I barely thought he was going to be a first-round player, period. I thought he was a late first-round guy. And so a lot of people are saying right now, well, Kyle Shanahan got talked into Trey Lance. Mac Jones was his guy. That's not a good process either. If they traded up to number 3 for Mac Jones and he was still on the board when they were picking at 12, that's a terrible process, right? So that's not a good thing either. That's not like trying to cover for Kyle and say, oh, he didn't get his guy. That would have been insanity if they traded up for Mac Jones at number 3, because clearly other teams didn't see it that way. Justin Fields ended up going at 11, and they hadn't even finished those evaluations. Maybe it turns out that they didn't like any of the 3 quarterbacks once they got to April, once they were done with those evaluations, right? Would the Miami Dolphins have said no to those draft picks in April? No. If there's 5 quarterbacks you like, even though it's never happened in NFL history, what if 1, 2, 3, 4 were all quarterbacks? Even though some of those teams you clearly were not going to take quarterbacks, would those picks have not? Would the Detroit Lions have said no at pick 5 to trading up if you knew you had that in your back pocket, that you're willing to spend 3 first-round picks and a 3rd on a player, right? So the whole process of going up to number 3 was really bad. If they end up with a superstar player, it's okay. That doesn't mean, though, that the process wasn't good. And then on top of that, when you just talk about what Trey Lance was as a prospect, and the reason why I thought at pick 12, man, Trey Lance is too talented. You can't pass up on him at pick 12 if he's there for you. But trading all those picks up to get him at 3, this is a guy who's had 1 season at the FCS level, who's played such little football. That 1 season he played wasn't even the season before the draft. Those are all alarming decisions from what would be a really naive front office to make that move when they did, for that process to have led to them, because there's just so many ways that something like that can go wrong. Are you familiar, Croc, with the the Bill Parcells, the commandments for drafting a quarterback?
Yeah, they got to play like 4 years in college, or have
Yeah.
to be like a 4-year starter. They have to throw a certain amount of passes, and kind of
Yeah.
that
It's like
whole thing kind of goes on.
It's like be a senior, which, I mean, none of the quarterbacks had all 7 of the 7 because none of the top prospects in the first round stay until their senior year anymore. But someone like Trevor Lawrence, he had 6 of the 7. He wasn't a senior, but he started for 3 years. He threw a certain amount of passes. He completed a certain percentage of his passes, and so on and so forth. Trey Lance only had 2 of the 7 because he had played such little football. And I know a lot of front offices didn't have Trey Lance on their board. Some of the teams loved Trey Lance, and there's a lot of reasons to love Trey Lance, but some of the teams didn't have him on their board. There was talk that maybe the Falcons were going to draft him at 4. I don't know if they actually were or not. I think there's a really good chance that Trey Lance would have still been there at 12 or close to 12, or you're trading up in front of the Broncos or the Panthers because you think they might take a quarterback, even though they clearly weren't even going to take a quarterback, right? So save yourself some draft picks, save yourself some first rounders, and then knowing that you draft a guy who's so raw, the thing he has to do is play. So it's not like sitting him for 2 years is helpful to his development, right? So he has
I
to
think that was
play.
a big thing. A lot of people were saying that they
Right.
thought it was kind of wild to draft him, a guy with such limited experience, and then have him sit another year. Like that, there were a lot of people that kind of pushed back on the idea of that, saying like, "Hey, this kid, like he needs to play to gain that experience."
Yes, exactly. And it's really hard to do that if you think you're in a win now mode, which maybe was that intersection of raw player. Let's use him as a runner because we're not sure of him as a passer yet, but we're still trying to win football games. And so all of that really goes haywire. And, all of the talk leading up and the months leading up to the draft where everyone's picking their favorite at quarterback. Then you've got Jimmy G and Trey Lance, and everyone's, pro Jimmy or your team Lance. And then that fight happens. And then you've got the talking heads on TV. Oh, look, this quarterback's going to play, or no, this quarterback's going to play. And there's all this stuff. You could see that all coming. And that worries me if Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch couldn't see any of this coming, because that process was pretty clear from then. Again, no hindsight. This is stuff we talked about at the time. They opened themselves up to a lot of the possibilities that we're seeing now of so many different ways this could go wrong with Trey Lance. And so just overall, the process, very naive move. And I've had problems with the process where the 49ers ended with all this. And the thing that had to happen is none of it matters as long as they're right. As long as they got it right and ended up with their star quarterback in Trey Lance, it's okay. That can still happen, but we just have to wait another year to find out and see that development in 2023.
Why do you think they drafted Trey Lance, right? When they identified Trey Lance as a guy that they wanted, what characteristics do you think kind of stood out to them? If you just had to rattle off a few things where they're like, you know what? They like this, and this.
Yep. I think he hit the physical height, weight, speed, athleticism, arm that you look for in a franchise quarterback, someone who could potentially be a difference maker. And I think they believed in the kid. They believed in the person, and they believed he could get there and achieve some things. So I don't think it's crazy. I think Kyle Shanahan saw Josh Allen dice him up and saw, well, this was a really raw player who was a hoss, had a cannon of an arm, athletic, and he was the type of player who was going to work hard and achieve that. And I think they probably saw a lot of that in Trey Lance.
So would you say that he has shown the ability to be what they drafted him to be, in the sense of expanding maybe potentially on the offense and bringing those different characteristics? I think I know what you're going to say, but
no, not enough. We're still sitting here, and I feel the exact same way I felt about Trey Lance before they even drafted him. It's like he could be that guy, but I don't have a lot to go on. I liked some of what I've seen. You don't love, it's not a big deal at all, but you're just getting clues. You don't love, some of the accuracy misses. You don't love him throwing dollars at a stripper in between week 1 and week 2.
You don't love throwing dollars at a stripper?
I mean, you don't want to see you just don't want to see it happens. I know it happens. You just don't want to see it from your
you don't, from the face of your team.
Right. Yeah. But like, I don't think he's anything from the neck up is going to be an issue or anything like that for him too. But I haven't seen enough consistency to think he's going to be a great player either. So it's just like, it's still just wide open unknown. I have no idea. It could go any extreme on either path for Trey Lance, good or bad.
I think for me, just truly understanding where he was and where you want him to get to, the biggest thing that I guess is cause for concern is him just missing this season. Like everything else, I felt like I was fine with the timeline of where he was. Yes, there were things that I would have done different, and we spoke on those things prior to week 1, 2021. So again, like you said, not in hindsight, those were our thoughts then and where we're headed now, right? But again, just watching him, I did feel like we were slowly creeping towards what it was you wanted him to be. Was it hitting the ground as fast as maybe Mahomes or Joe Burrow going to a Super Bowl in his second year and all those things? No, right? But just in the sense of, hey, I want to see him get better at this and all these little things. And am I seeing flashes of it? Yes. Am I seeing flashes of him being able to push the ball down the field? Yes. Am I seeing flashes of being able to create off script, pick up plays, first downs with his legs? Like those things were all coming together. And then when you hear Deebo Samuel talk about him in the post game, and it was, man, I feel so bad for him because of how hard he's worked and he's all in on this and he's worked so hard to get to this point and all like those things. I strongly believe, and I still do, that he having this year 3, he'd be a lot closer to what everyone wants him to be. I felt like he was, but now you don't have it. And even for me, somebody who sees the big picture, it is a huge question mark because you missed this year. I mean, I can't even describe how big, like, again, go back to like, man, I feel bad because I don't even know how to judge it now because it was like, oh, well, okay, just needs time, needs reps, etc. Has to play, needs experience, whatever. But then now you're going into year 3 and are you starting that process over again of, oh, he just needs time, he just needs reps, he just needs throws. That's the part that, even for me, someone who believes like, oh yeah, he'll become this guy, it's even I don't want to say a doubt, but I guess, yeah, kind of a doubt because of just the way it has played out. And I think that's very difficult.
And it was so important, more than any other quarterback that I can remember. The reps and the experience he was going to gain this year was so important because of how little experience he had before. When 2023 begins, Trey Lance will have played 4 full games in almost 4 calendar years since 2019 when he was a teenager. It was the last time he played a full season. And there will be a whole new group of rookie quarterbacks who have played more football than Trey Lance starting next year. That's what's crazy. And so it was really important for him to get that experience. And that's why the Bill Parcells commandments exist. Have a player who's seen all this stuff. Like if Trey Lance would have played 4 years in college, he wouldn't be worried about the developmental curves. Like he's played a lot of ball. He got hurt, come back wherever he left off. That's where he's going.
Kind of like Deshaun Watson, right? When Deshaun Watson got hurt, it was just like, all right, he tore his ACL, he'll be back,
Right. Yeah. But you don't have that to lean on if you're Trey Lance because he needed the experience part on top of it. So it makes it really dicey and really scary there. But I still believe in the dude and he's still talented. So let's see where he's at when he comes back after this injury. And I have no idea. Well, I have no doubt, like endless conversations about that in the off season, but now it's Jimmy G's team. And I think the win-loss projections don't change for this season. So now it's on to the Denver Broncos on Sunday Night Football this week, right, Croc?
Yep.
All right.
And I do think even, when you have Jimmy Garoppolo as a starter, the win-loss, if there was a change, I would say in favor of the 49ers, maybe not in favor of the bettors, because I would say it would go up at least half a game.
You go up?
Yeah, at least half a game.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we went too long on the Trey stuff, but it was a conversation we needed to have and sort of get those thoughts out there now that we've had an opportunity to sleep on it and think about the whole Trey scenario and everything that's gone on with him. And unfortunately, yeah, again, the big thing is you feel bad for Trey himself that he's going to have to go through this. And I think he's headstrong enough to come out the other side in a good place. And we'll see what that looks like next season for Trey Lance. If for those of you who are hanging on in this podcast because they wanted to hear our takes on Talanoa Hufanga, I apologize. You're going to have to wait. We'll push that off and tease it for tomorrow's Winky Wednesday episode here on Locked On 49ers. We'll talk Talanoa Hufanga. Is he the next NFL superstar safety for the 49ers? And talk a little bit about the wide receiver usage too. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and how they're looking so far in the offense in 2022. Coming up next time, right here, Locked On 49ers.